John Borthwick, former Australian Travel Writer of the Year, current judge of the British Travel Writer of the Year.
Yeah, one of the awards within the British Travel Writing Awards of the Year.
And more importantly, right at this present moment, my travel companion in Northern Thailand.
And what a pleasure it's been, Nikki.
It has been amazing. Now, John, you are incredibly well travelled. Could you give us some career highlights just to give us a taste of what it's been like for you?
Well, I mentioned one to you the other night. Amongst many, swimming at the North Pole, bizarre as that is, was a highlight. Particularly having to jump into an ice hole with two Russians behind me, one with a machine gun and the other with a bottle of vodka. The machine gun was not to shoot the pikers who wouldn't jump in, it was to shoot the polar bears should they appear. Not that they do appear, and if a polar bear appears it's better to shoot the customer because the paperwork is so complicated if you shoot a polar bear. The other Russian, well, that shall be revealed. So I'm just in board shorts, there's no wetsuits or dry suits or anything like that. You jump in with a rope around you so that if you have a cardiac arrest they can at least haul you back out. You jump in, it's exceptionally cold, there are expletives deleted as you could imagine. You clamber back out onto the iceberg, and at that point the second Russian uncaps the bottle of vodka, pours a shot and you down it. And you have proven that you're truly
that you're a survivor if nothing else. And
yeah.
The joys of travelling for you, what are they?
Oh, God, that's like the joys of life. I'm not a foodie. I can almost tick the things that are not. So I'm not a foodie. I used to do a lot of photography. I do less so now. Words are still a great driver for me, both privately and publicly. People, I won't romanticize it that I travel the world to meet exotic people, but they are the spice of part of what happens in your day. Inquisitiveness. I've become less inquisitive, I think, having travelled for about 35 years. Not to say the world has become passé, but you get a certain level, there's a kind of ceiling on your adrenaline levels of novelty and exoticism. But those things have driven me strongly, particularly in my younger years, which was some time ago.
And you've travelled really extensively in Southeast Asia, obviously, a real playground for the Australians, less so for maybe Europeans. What keeps bringing you back here?
To Southeast Asia?
Yeah, and to Thailand in particular.
Okay. Proximity is one thing, of course. I'm a journalist, that is a commercial writer, so I often go to places where I have pre-sold a story. I have a commission from a major publication. I don't just travel at whim. One could, but I spent 20 years travelling at whim, and now I've turned that into an occupation. So where I have story value is important to me. Thailand in particular is a really story-rich destination, and it never runs out of new opportunities for me. To wit, the current trip that you and I are on, which is travelling northern Thailand in a tuk-tuk. I had never heard of that until 6 months ago. I knew about tuk-tuks, of course, and being overcharged in Bangkok. That's another story. But I had no idea that some bright British entrepreneur had started up a fleet of tuk-tuks and was taking commercial travellers. So there you are, that's an example. Each year, each 6 months, I find a new story angle in Thailand, along with refreshing old angles, and so it brings me back.
Critics might say that Thailand has become complacent in its tourist offer. I don't know if you would agree with that, but is something like this a rarity, a new offer like this?
Absolutely. I could agree with both statements. There is certain complacency because parts of Thailand are so successful, such as Koh Samui and Phuket, to name just a couple, that there's a default position. You can just keep on selling more and more arrivals into those destinations, and they deliver, particularly for new arrivals. They are satisfying places to arrive at. But because they're so successful, sometimes let's say some Thai tour companies or even government agencies have gone, okay, it works, then it'll work again. On the other hand, you have people like our friend Bruce Haxton, who came up with this lovely idea of tuk-tuk tours. And as I referred to earlier, each year I will find something new and novel. So there is complacency on one hand, but there is always innovation on the other. And the Thais themselves are pretty innovative people. Okay, Bruce started the tuk-tuks, but I go to many enterprises that are run and started by Thais and are very successful.
We're currently sitting in this beautiful fern resort. It's been made famous by Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's many visits. Is it hard to get people who are not Thai to come and visit places like this, do you think?
No. If I can speak about the Australian market, we've been coming to Thailand for 30, 40 years, so there's quite a degree of familiarity with what's available and then what you've seen and what you would like to go beyond. So the Australian clientele, for instance, would probably seek out something that's new and novel like this. Having been to Samui and Phuket and Bangkok and Chiang Mai 2 or 3 times, they'll go, what's new? So this would be a perfect destination for them. I mean, it's a great, forget the star stuff for just a minute, it's a beautiful resort in itself. We're living in the middle of a rainforest with a river behind us. We had a thunderstorm last night that was absolutely world class.
It was an outstanding thunderstorm by anyone's standards.
Yeah, and a good breakfast, and we're safe and dry beneath an umbrella.
Yeah, and you can hear the noise of the river in the background. So someone here is sweeping the car park. There are 2 swimming pools, one of which is infinity, so there's nothing to complain about. So 35 years of travelling. How have you seen the travel world change, especially in the context of what we're doing with Low Season Traveller, trying to sort of protect against over-tourism? What are the ravages that you've seen from over-tourism?
Well, I'll start with 50 years of travel. And in those, I won't labour it too long, but in those days I started off literally hitchhiking around the world on cargo ships, working. One had no idea of travel insurance, for instance. I took off, I stayed away for 3 years. Never a notion of travel insurance. God knows what would have happened if God knows what had gone wrong. So that was kind of the beginning of the I don't know if there was ever a beginning of backpacking, but it was the beginning of the baby boomer post-war exploration of the world, particularly the ones that went to South America, as I did, and also the overland route from Europe to India. So in those days it was very wild and woolly. You were on local buses, staying in flop houses, flea houses, whatever you could afford. And what you could afford was basically the very, very cheapest place you could find, because you're going to stretch $1,000 to last a year, as you could, and as you no longer can. All right, since then there's been increasing momentum of travel. It's almost exponential. I think the human desire to see beyond our little bit of dog patch is inextinguishable. Where you define what point it became over-tourism, I don't know. There had been travellers in the 1850s complaining about the grand tour hordes already in Rome and in Florence. It's a perspective. Over-tourism today, yes, it's very obvious in places, and we know them, like Venice and the Great Wall of China and the Vatican, blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't be self-righteous enough to say, I saw them in my youth. Why should 10 million Chinese people be there next time I go? We are all part of the one amalgam doing this. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, I suppose we do know that in certain places that if you are going to push 1.5 billion external tourists, not domestic tourists, into the world, that the very treasures that we want to see, the experiences we want to have, are null and void because they've been destroyed by the very people who go there to look at them. So how do we overcome that, or do you think we can't?
I'm not a pessimist when it comes to travel, but I'm sceptical about the idea that you can put ceilings and lids on things. There are exceptions. Somewhere like Bhutan that didn't ever get into the mass tourism industry, and they've been able to construct a $200 or $300 per day minimum spend, etc. But they are small enough and they're exotic and unique enough to have made that work as an economic model for themselves. Other places can't do that. Part of over-tourism, of course, also is domestic tourism. Thais have got as much right as any mob of fly-ins and blow-ins to be able to go and see all of their country, as do Chinese, certainly, and Australians, or whoever. With over-tourism, maybe the one way of doing it is trying to diffuse the peak seasons into the off-seasons. But it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like you'll lock the national inflow of tourists in Thailand, for instance, at 40 million people, as it was before COVID.
Yeah.
You'll still have 40 million, but there'll be more of them going in off-season or low season, as we call it. So it might be 45 million then. It's as I say, it's not a zero-sum game.
So the idea that you do kind of try and spread the tourism game over a longer period does alleviate some of that kind of that crush.
It can, theoretically.
Yeah.
Yep.
So flip it round, how would you advise a person to travel well, to be a good tourist?
Oh, the first thing, probably don't listen to me. Be polite to people. Tip well. It's not necessarily about paper bags or versus plastic bags, but a lot of it's about the human face-to-faceness. We have the privilege of being here. Return it as a courtesy to people. People who may make very low incomes, but be enormously polite and kind and helpful and funny with you. It's also always going to help them, without being patronising, if you've tipped a bit more, that you haven't haggled about the last dime or the last satang. You know, stuff like that. It's a little bit off the ideological register, but face to face, it helps people.
And how will you keep your appetite for travel sharp?
Oh, gosh. You're a tricky questioner, madam. Part of it's inbuilt. There are folk who stay at home and never want to go anywhere. And someone like, I think it was Voltaire or the equivalent, said, most of the world's troubles would be solved if we could just be happy sitting at home in our room or rooms.
Well, you weren't listening to Voltaire.
I was not. So I had this innate drive, this inquisitiveness, which is somewhat attenuated these days, but I've still got the impulse to get out of the house. I'm in a lucky position of not having... I'm low maintenance, put it that way. I don't have a mortgage, I don't have any debts, I don't have children expecting, or grandchildren in that case, expecting gratuities or inheritances or whatever. So I'm in a fairly good position to keep on travelling if I wish. It is still motivated by the fact that I love writing, and I would travel for its own sake to particular places, but I love travelling to places where I can write what I hope is a good story that challenges me creatively.
Well, I look forward to reading many more of your stories, and I have thoroughly enjoyed your company on this trip, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikki, and you've been a really good travelling companion for sure.
That's nice to know.